because the wind noise is so bad. Now, what effect am I going to have? I've been there for 5 years. What effect am I going to have in another 5 years if those windmills just get so swoosh or swoosh? I can't enjoy quality of life there, even if I don't have a medical attention.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean, I hope I didn't suggest that I was disregarding these other effects.
No, I was just mentioning the fact that you didn't mention epilepsy from your flickers in your report.
Yeah.
Miss Anderson did from Ohio.
Okay.
She did mention that, and I just wanted to reinforce that issue.
Yeah, that's one it's a bit controversial. I mean, definitely there are some credible people out there who are suggesting that that's a problem. There are others who say, no, that's not really a problem. I mean, the light flicker is certainly maddening. I mean, having experienced it, I find it extremely unpleasant. But I think there's a little bit of legitimate debate about whether it triggers epilepsy. I mean, I'm not saying that no one is claiming.
Have you ever seen an epileptic seizure?
Yeah, sure.
Have you?
Yeah.
Can you explain what happens from that? They have absolutely no control of their bodily functions. They swell, their tongue is swelled. You've got to make sure that they don't swallow their tongue. And if these flickers are from these windmills are creating that, and there's been case studies of this.
Well, I'm not the right person to ask about epilepsy. I mean, you mentioned the electromagnetic fields. That's, I mentioned sort of the two leading theories for what the causes were, and then said, there are some other people with other ideas about some of the effects. And that's one of them. Some people definitely believe that that's a major part of the causal pathway. Many of us doubt that to be the case, but again, it doesn't matter who's right about what the causal pathway is, because we know that there is a causal pathway, and that's really what matters.
Any other? Yes.
My name is Bob Logan from Franklin Grove. I work with the developmentally disabled, and I am troubled to read literature produced by promotional materials by wind energy companies that tell you that the flicker does not cause seizures. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's the sole source of anybody's seizure, but they do cause, even so much the flicker of a television can send somebody into a seizure. And so whenever I read the material out here, because some of it to me is put out there to convince decision makers that there's no problem. That's not true. Now, it's not a problem for everybody, and I fully do not expect to have a seizure when I'm exposed to flicker. But I do know that people who have issues with it, and having dealt with people with developmentally disabled and disabilities, and a lot of them are subject to seizures, we've actually had to get rid of the television in certain places because it causes that, and it's not nearly the flicker that you get from and I have been in those places where you can see the flickers just like if we sit over here and took the light switch and went like this tonight, you'd be bothered by it. A little bit of a jitter flicker on the television is nothing compared to that, and yet that is significant enough to send somebody into a seizure. And I know case history. I can't talk about case history because you have the medical laws, but I can tell you there are some folks that it has happened to.
Over here.
Yes.
Rarely do I talk to anyone with public policy experience in depth. If we rise above wind turbine companies and look at any company in the United States, if they have a confidentiality clause that effectively eliminates the adverse reporting of health issues, would you call that a violation of good public policy?
Well, it's certainly frustrating as a scientist because it costs us a lot of data that we might use. I mean, I suppose it depends on the spirit behind it. There's certainly, many of us sign all sorts of non-reporting clauses about information that we might become privy to. On the other hand, reporting about personal health effects does strike me that there's an ethical case to be made. This is nothing I've formally studied. I'm talking off the cuff here, but it certainly does strike me that there's an ethical case to be made that you inviolably own your own body and your own experiences, and nothing should forbid you from being able to talk about that, just like nothing should allow somebody to own you as a slave in some sense. So I can see that there's an ethical case to be made there. It's nothing that I've done a formal ethical study of, so I hesitate to be too definitive about it.
Perhaps an example is if a chemical company has such a confidentiality clause that employees can't report health effects from the chemicals that they have to handle daily. I think we see that as abhorrent.
Yeah, I don't think that would be
So,
allowed.
yeah, I see some parallels here. Thank you.
Yes.
Kelly Robrick, Franklin Grove. Are your studies peer reviewed? Because peer review seems to be a big deal with a lot of people.
It is a big deal to a lot of people. Unfortunately, I think it's most of the people who don't really understand what peer review is. I mean, peer review publications are sort of a way for professors to keep score. I mean, that's first and foremost what they are. It's just a numbers game for promotion. The peer review process doesn't ensure that anything is right. Okay, so I mentioned that paper that I had that came out in the Bulletin of Science, Technology, and Society. Peer-reviewed publication. I have some of these case studies, 3, not randomly chosen, 3 particularly interesting adverse event reports attached as an appendix right there. Okay, so we have 3 adverse event reports that are peer-reviewed publications. Does that make them any more right than they were before that? Well, of course not, because reviewers can't judge the veracity of this information. Similarly, reviewers can't really judge the accuracy of an analysis. I'm a journal editor. I've started a journal. I publish in the peer-reviewed literature all the time. And I can tell you from experience that there is nothing particularly different about a paper once it's peer-reviewed rather than before it's peer-reviewed. Indeed, in sciences where there's sort of clear yes or no answers, mathematics, theoretical physics, and so forth, peer review is sort of faded away. It's been recognized as not terribly useful. People post their paper on the internet. It either convinces people or not. And so courtrooms, lawyers have sort of made a fetish, if you will, of peer review, as if it vouched for something being, fundamentally right. But that's never what it was intended to be, and it's never what it was. So, the answer is yes, some of this stuff is peer reviewed, some of it isn't. I don't see much difference in quality between the two in this particular area.
Yes.
You mentioned in your presentation that...
Name, please.
Steve Robrick, Franklin Grove. I think I get that by now. You mentioned in your presentation that more studies need to be done, and some people have maybe one of those is tie between shadow flicker and epilepsy, but what kind of study would you like to see as the next step?
Well, the key study, and we've got a couple of these that have happened. We have a few others in the planning stage. I'm involved in one of them, is the systematic population study, where we gather health and other information about a group of people who are about to be exposed. Sort of tough to do because I'm here saying that we ought not to be exposing any more people to this, but if it's going to happen anyway, we might as well take advantage of it for study. A group of people who are about to become exposed to wind turbines, learn something about them, wait for the turbines to go online, study their health conditions, everyone's, okay? So we'll go in there and find that this person had no problem, this person had no problem, this person had a minor problem, this person had a major problem, and we can get it counted up. Now, if we had 30 of those and they reflected different distances, perhaps different turbine technologies, different sizes, as came up in the conversation already, then we can actually address the question of what it takes to not have these problems happen. Now, to do that less destructively, that is without having to install these as part of it, we can do pretty good studies of people who are already exposed because the facility is existing and online. Compare them to similar people who are not exposed, their neighbors a few miles away, and again try to quantify the effects, see how fast they drop off over distance, see how much direction matters, see how much having 5 versus 1 within a radius matters, and so forth. So those are the types of studies that would be most useful for answering the questions about, how many people are really suffering these problems, and is there anything we can do to make the risk less? Right now, there's all kinds of speculation about, those were all, that adverse event report was about, this particular turbine technology. We have a new turbine technology, and therefore there's nothing to worry about. Well, we don't know that. I mean, just because it's different doesn't mean that we have any reason to believe that it's better. That's the type of thing that we could figure out with more research.
Any other questions, comments? Third person here?
Jack.
Yes.
It seems as though, I'm sorry, Jack Kelly from Franklin Grove. It seems as though one of the problems with the wind turbines is the density of the population of the area that we live in. And is it such a thing that we just have too much population density for these things to be here? It just seems as though you can't get basically areas where you've got 1.5 miles from these things if you go putting them out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, from the perspective of, what might be considered an ethical rule of don't put these closer than we know is okay, which is, more like 2 miles before we're really very confident right now. It might be 1.5 miles, but, that might be enough, but we just don't know for sure yet. Yeah, that's entirely right. I mean, if you have sufficient population density like you do in most populated areas, you're pretty much guaranteed that somebody is going to be close enough to these that they're at risk from these problems. And, there are places without very many people, like, say, offshore, which has its own challenges, but at least you wouldn't have these health problems there. There's just aren't that many stretches of land in this country, or in the world for that matter, that are close to population, because you need to have these on the electricity grid, but not close to somebody's backyard. And yeah, that's a real challenge. And again, it comes back to this question of if we absolutely had to have these things, if they had just tremendous benefits, if there was a difference between having electricity and not, that would be one issue, but that's not what we're dealing with. So then we have to ask ourselves, is it really okay to inflict these on anybody?
Yes.
I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier, but
Name, please.
I'm not Rogan, I'm sorry, from Franklin Grove also. I wasn't here earlier, so I don't know if you addressed at all the issues with employees. I heard some of it here when you talked a moment ago, but I have read some of the literature put out by the energy companies themselves, the manufacturers, that warn their people not to spend absolutely no more time than necessary within 1,300 feet of the towers for health safety reasons. And to my way of thinking, if they can't work in that area, how in the devil can you live in it? Because Vestas is one of the companies that in their